Okay, so today we'll be talking about how society's perception of women has limited their opportunities. So my argument is that in the United States, society's perception of women, which is that they're inferior to men and have been seen as second-class citizens, has limited their opportunities socially, politically, and economically. So to start off, my connection to my stimulus materials. So between my argument and the two stimulus materials I chose, I found an overarching theme of perception, which includes awareness and bias and perspectives. So 3D pavement art, I found that whenever the position that people were in when they were taking these pictures or when they were looking at this art determined what image they saw, which is a lot like how society's perception determines women's opportunities and how perspective influences outcomes. And then in attitudes towards Muslim women in the West, the article talked about how women were seen as needing to be saved, which represented that women were seen as helpless and weak, and how they appear inferior, which is a large problem for how society perceives women. Okay, moving on to historical context. So women's opportunities have always been secondary to men's, and women had very limited rights for a long time. They couldn't own their own property until 1839. They couldn't vote until 1920, and they couldn't get a legal safe abortion until 1973 due to the Roe versus Wade case, but still now it's still a lot of trouble to do so. Also, labor laws for women, when they could work, they had a limited amount of hours and time that they could spend at work, which limited how high of a position they could have and how much money then that they could make to provide for themselves and their families. And also in Congress and the House of Representatives, for a while women weren't even part of this, so they couldn't even have representation for the state. And finally, as we know, presidents, none of them have ever been women. Okay, now for careers in the workplace. So a large issue is the wage gap, meaning that women are typically paid 80% of what men are paid for doing the same job and working the same amount of time. And also there are very few women in high-level positions like CEOs or presidents of companies, which I'll get to in the next slide. And then also sexual harassment is a large problem in the workplace. 1 in 4 women are sexually harassed at work, and 75% of women, when they report being sexually harassed, they receive negative repercussions, such as getting fired. So for being a victim, they are being punished. So this represents the Fortune 1000, which is the top 1,000 largest companies in America, ranked by how much money they bring in. And out of those 1,000 companies in 2017, only 54 of them had female CEOs, as you can see. Okay, now for education. So in 1700s colonial America, they had stuff called dame schools, which prepared boys for town schools, but girls could not even attend town schools until the 1800s. In 1869, the Girton College at Cambridge was created by 3 women, and this was the first women's college. And following this, into the 1900s, there was a gradual increase of women attending higher levels of education. But this is made majority for white women. Women of color had even more difficulty in being able to attend higher levels of education. And finally, Title IX was passed in 1972, and it prohibits the discrimination on the basis of sex in any educational programs that are federally funded. Okay, now for society. A large issue in society is the media sexualizing women. So they are putting women out into the media with very little clothes, and they're objectifying them for their bodies and using that to advertise certain products. And this affects really any women at all, but specifically young girls, because it's giving an unrealistic image, especially because a lot of the media uses Photoshop. Also, it poses the question of, are women being valued on their beauty or their intellectual abilities? Finally, female Olympians recently talked about how they were being judged not only on their performance in the Olympics, but also on their looks. And also, I want to talk about the women women's role in society, which has been to do domestic and household duties instead of pursuing careers. So men and women have had different expectations, and that's because of the Western culture teaching girls to cook and clean. Like there used to be home economics classes in high schools, which is limiting women in pursuing careers that men are expected to pursue. So finally, to implications. Although it has been a large struggle for women over time, there's been a lot of progress. Women now have more equal and greater access to opportunities as men do. And there's more women's representation, and women are now overcoming more barriers. However, there's a question of, is it enough? And there have been protests like the Women's March, so women have more of a voice in society and they're able to stand up for themselves. And then finally we have my conclusions. So women have to do more and work harder in order to be equal to men, and they are often seen as weak or inferior, and they are objectified by media and by others. And this has been caused by centuries of inequality around the world, not just in the United States. And so I propose 3 solutions. 1, we need to erase the stigma of women being inferior to men at all. And we need to implement more laws and regulate more equal pay and equal opportunities for women in education, etc. And finally, we need to elect more women into politics so that we can have greater representation. So we need to go from inequality to equality. And that's it.
All right.
Let me ask you a couple questions.
So, what information did you need that you weren't able to find, and how did you go about trying to find that information?
I wish I could have found more information about women's attitudes towards this problem. For example, how I know that a lot of women have had issues with the inequality, but I also wanted to know the other side of it. But since that's not such concrete information, it was a little bit more difficult to find.
Okay. So explain the level of certainty you have about your conclusion.
I'm very certain of my conclusions. I know that inequality is a huge problem, and these also help me lead to my solutions. And I know that my solutions need to be done. However, I'm not as certain of how well it could be done in society.
All right.